Some stories are loud, full of fireworks, fanfare, and the kind of drama that makes headlines. But the stories that stay with us, they're often quiet. They live in kitchens where the coffee's gone cold, in the long drives home when the radio hums softly, in the sacrifices no one claps for. Here at Twisted Roots, we tell those stories. The ones about family, the love that binds it, the fractures that test it, and the choices that define it. If you believe, as I do, that family is never just about blood, I hope you'll subscribe and walk with us through these tangled, beautiful roots. Today's story is called, "My Kids Told Me I Wasn't Classy Enough for Their Wedding, So I Watched from the Parking Lot." The first thing you'd notice about Jack Bennett was his hands. They were the kind of hands that told you their own story: broad palms, calloused fingertips, the faint smell of cedar that never quite washed away. 40 years as a carpenter will do that to you. Jack's shop sat behind a weather-worn house on the edge of a small Ohio town. The sign above the door read Bennett Woodworks, though the paint had faded to a pale ghost of the deep green it once was. Inside, air was rich with sawdust and varnish, and sunlight slanted through old windows, catching the floating motes like tiny golden snowflakes. He had built furniture for nearly every neighbor within a 20-mile radius, dining tables that held 100 Thanksgiving dinners, rocking chairs that cradled newborns and grandmothers alike. But the pieces Jack kept for himself were simpler: a plain wooden bed, a sturdy desk, and a kitchen table worn smooth by elbows and coffee mugs. It had been just Jack in that house for the last 12 years, ever since Martha passed. She'd been the one with the laughter that filled a room, the one who could take the sharp edges out of his words just by touching his arm. Losing her was like losing the color from the world. He still talked to her sometimes, mostly in the quiet hours after dinner, as he sat by the kitchen window looking at the sycamore tree she'd planted the year their daughter was born. Jack wasn't poor, but he wasn't wealthy either. His work paid the bills, kept food on the table, and left just enough for the occasional fishing trip or Sunday morning at the diner with old friends. His clothes were practical: worn jeans, flannel shirts, and the heavy boots he'd resoled twice because they still had a few miles left in them. He never cared about appearances, not in the way some people did. He measured a man by whether he kept his word, not by the cut of his suit. But the world around him, especially the world his children had grown into, didn't always see it that way. His daughter Emily had been just 7 when Martha died. Jack raised her with the same hands he built his furniture, steady, patient, and with a kind of quiet love you couldn't mistake once you'd felt it. He worked late into the night to pay for her school clothes, sat through every parent-teacher conference, and never missed a single one of her soccer games, no matter how bad the weather was. Still, as she grew older, Jack began to notice the spaces between them widening. Emily went to college, moved to the city, and started building a life that didn't have sawdust in the air. Her friends wore crisp suits and tailored dresses. Their laughter echoed over wine glasses in restaurants where Jack would have felt out of place. He didn't resent it. He was proud of her. Proud in a way that made his chest feel tight sometimes. But there was an unspoken truth he could sense. Even if no one said it out loud, in her new world, Jack Bennett didn't quite fit. That truth would come into sharp, undeniable focus on the day she got married. Emily called one Sunday afternoon in early spring. Jack was in the shop, bent over a half-finished bookshelf for Mrs. Donnelly down the road. The phone buzzed on the workbench, its screen smudged with fingerprints and a fine layer of sawdust. "Dad," her voice was bright, almost too bright. "I have some news." Jack set the chisel down carefully, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good news, I hope." "It is really good. Daniel and I were getting married." The words hung in the air, and for a moment all Jack heard was the faint hum of the shop's overhead light. Then a slow smile broke across his face. "Well now, that is good news." He could picture her in that instant, eyes shining, hair pulled back the way she wore it when she was excited, one hand probably playing with the edge of her sleeve. She'd always done that when she had something important to say. "We've set the date for June, at the Lakeside Grand, you know it." Jack thought of the Lakeside Grand with its marble floors, tall glass walls, and manicured gardens that looked like they'd been trimmed with scissors. He'd driven past it once when delivering a custom table to a client. "I've seen it," he said. "Looks real fancy." "It is," Emily laughed. It's perfect." Jack nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Then it's perfect for you." For the next 10 minutes she rattled off details: bridesmaids' dresses, flower arrangements. How Daniel's family had connections with the event manager. Jack listened, his responses short but genuine. He was happy for her, of course he was. When she mentioned that Daniel's parents would be hosting a small engagement dinner, she hesitated. It's just they have a certain style, Dad. You might want to, dress up a bit. Jack chuckled softly. I'll wear my Sunday best. But something in her tone lingered after the call ended. It wasn't unkind, but it carried the carefulness of someone navigating around a fragile thing. Jack knew that voice. It was the one people used when they didn't want to say exactly what they meant. That night he sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling beside him, and stared at the old wedding photo of him and Martha on the wall. She was beaming, holding his arm like she'd never let go. His suit hadn't been expensive, the tie borrowed from his brother. But in her eyes he'd looked like the finest man alive. Jack wondered if Emily's eyes still saw him that way. 2 weeks later, Jack found himself pulling his old Chevy into the circular driveway of the Whitmore residence, Daniel's parents' home. It was the kind of house you only saw in magazines, white columns stretching up toward a second-story balcony, windows so clean they reflected the sky, and a front lawn manicured within an inch of its life. Even the hedges looked like they'd been trimmed with a ruler. Jack stepped out, smoothing the front of his best shirt, light blue. Freshly pressed, he'd polished his boots until the leather shone, the same pair he'd worn to Martha's funeral. It was the nicest he could manage without feeling like he was wearing someone else's skin. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman in a cream-colored dress stood there, her pearls catching the light. Her hair was set in the kind of perfect wave that took more time than Jack spent on breakfast. You must be Emily's father, she said, her smile polite but thin. I'm Victoria Whitmore. Her eyes traveled down his shirt, over his boots, and back up to his face, the way a jeweler might examine a piece they already knew wasn't worth much. Jack offered his hand. Jack Bennett, good to meet you, ma'am. She took it briefly, her fingers cool, then stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the house smelled faintly of citrus and something floral. The floors were polished marble, the kind that made your footsteps echo. Jack followed Victoria into a living room where Daniel's father, Charles, stood near the fireplace, drink in hand. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a navy blazer with a pocket square. Jack, Charles said, shaking his hand firmly. Daniel's told us about you, carpenter, right? That's right, been at it most of my life. Practical work, Charles replied, as if stating a fact about the weather. Though I imagine it must be tiring. Jack smiled politely. Tired's just another word for a good day's work. They sat for cocktails. Conversation moved easily when it was about the wedding venue, the caterer, or the wine list. But whenever Jack tried to chime in, his words seemed to land like a nail bent under the hammer, noticed, but not quite welcome. When dinner was served, Victoria asked about his shop. Jack spoke briefly, but she quickly steered the topic back to Daniel's recent promotion and Charles's golf tournaments. It wasn't hostility, exactly. More like the kind of detachment you reserve for a neighbor you wave to but never invite inside. After dessert, as coats were fetched and goodbyes exchanged, Victoria's smile returned, polished, practiced. The wedding will be a very elegant affair, Mr. Bennett. I trust you'll prepare accordingly. Jack nodded, meeting her eyes. I'll be there for my daughter, that's what matters. And as he stepped back into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just been measured and found lacking. Back home, the shop felt different that night. The air was still thick with the scent of fresh-cut pine, but the quiet pressed harder, as if it knew something he didn't want to admit. Jack set his keys on the counter, took off his boots, and sat for a long time at the kitchen table without turning on the light. Victoria's words lingered, prepare accordingly. He could almost hear the unspoken part, so you won't embarrass us. He reached for the wedding invitation sitting under a magnet on the fridge. It was printed on thick cream paper with gold lettering, the kind of card you didn't throw away even after the event. The Lakeside Grand June 14th black tie formal. Jack had never owned a tuxedo. The closest he'd come was the dark suit he'd worn to Martha's funeral. He still kept it in the back of his closet, the shoulders a little too broad now, the pants worn shiny at the knees. He thought about wearing it anyway. But then he pictured Emily. Standing among Daniel's friends and family, their dresses shimmering under chandeliers, their laughter bubbling over champagne flutes. He saw himself in that picture, not fitting in, not because he didn't belong to her, but because he didn't belong to them. The next morning, after finishing a job in town, he stopped at Miller's Men's Wear. It wasn't the kind of place he usually shopped. The window displays showed mannequins in slim-cut suits with price tags that made his throat tighten. A young clerk with hair slicked back like a movie star greeted him. "Looking for something special, sir." "Something for my daughter's wedding," Jack said, formal. The clerk sized him up quickly. "We can get you into a tux that'll make you look like you just stepped off a movie set." Jack chuckled. "Don't need to look like a movie star, just need to look like I belong." An hour later, he walked out with a charcoal gray suit, modern but not flashy. It cost more than he'd planned, but he told himself it was worth it. It was for Emily. He added a crisp white shirt, a silk tie in deep navy, and a pair of polished black shoes that still felt stiff in the box. That night he set the suit on the back of his bedroom door and stood looking at it for a long time. It was strange how a few pieces of fabric could carry so much weight. He imagined Martha sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling that knowing smile. "She's your girl, Jack. You show up for her no matter what," and he would. No matter how he felt about the Whitmores, no matter the looks or the quiet judgment, he would stand in that room for his daughter. Because that's what fathers did. They showed up, even when it wasn't easy. The morning of June 14th broke with a sky the color of polished silver. Clouds moved lazily overhead, promising rain by evening. Jack stood at the kitchen counter, nursing a cup of coffee he'd brewed stronger than usual. The suit hung in the bedroom doorway, waiting like a silent promise. He took his time getting ready, a fresh shave, the crisp shirt still smelling faintly of the store. The tie knotted with slow precision in front of the bathroom mirror. He had to start over twice before getting it right. The new shoes felt tight around his toes, but they shined like black glass. By noon he was ready. He checked the time, plenty of hours before the ceremony. The drive to the Lakeside Grand would take a little over an hour, but Jack had planned to leave early. He wanted to be sure there were no surprises. He picked up the small wooden box sitting on his workbench, the one he'd spent evenings perfecting. Inside was Emily's wedding gift, a hand-carved jewelry box made from walnut, its lid inlaid with a delicate pattern of maple leaves. Under the lid he'd lined it with soft felt and tucked a note inside, just a few lines telling her how proud he was, how much her mother would have loved this day. By the time he eased the Chevy out of the driveway, the sun had retreated behind thick clouds. The air smelled like rain. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the wooden box in the passenger seat. Traffic into the city was heavier than usual. SUVs with ribbons tied to their side mirrors, sedans stuffed with flowers, the hum of 100 different celebrations all moving at once. Jack turned down the final stretch toward the hotel, the Lakeside Grand rising ahead like a palace out of place in Ohio, stone walls, arched windows, and the lake shimmering behind it. He parked near the far edge of the lot, where his old truck wouldn't stand out against the sea of polished sedans and imported luxury cars. For a moment he just sat there, the engine ticking in the silence, watching guests in gowns and tailored suits step out of gleaming vehicles and glide toward the entrance. Jack reached for the jewelry box, feeling the smooth wood under his fingertips. He pictured Emily's face when she saw it, hoped it would remind her of the home she'd come from, the love that had been her foundation long before this day. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out into the cooling air, straightened his tie, and started walking toward the lobby doors, unaware that the day was about to unfold in a way no amount of preparation could have fixed. The lobby of the Lakeside Grand was all marble and chandeliers. Soft classical music drifted from hidden speakers, and the scent of lilies floated in the air, almost too perfect, too polished. Jack stepped inside, the wooden box cradled carefully in both hands. He paused for a moment to take it all in, the grand staircase sweeping up to the second floor, the tall glass windows framing the lake, the echo of laughter from somewhere deeper in the building. He had just started toward the reception desk when a familiar voice cut through the air. "Mr. Bennett." He turned to see Victoria Whitmore gliding toward him, her cream dress replaced by a floor-length gown the color of champagne. Diamonds caught the light at her neck and ears. Her smile was the same as it had been the night they first met, polite but without warmth. "Victoria," Jack said, nodding. "You look lovely. Where should I?" She held up a hand. The gesture small but firm. "Jack, I think it's best if we speak privately for a moment." Before he could answer, Daniel appeared beside her, tall in his tuxedo, his face set in a strained smile. "Hey Jack, son," Jack said, a note of pride in his voice. "You look sharp, big day." Daniel glanced at his mother, then back at Jack. "About that we have a bit of a concern." Victoria's voice slipped in, smooth as silk. "This is a very high-profile wedding, Mr. Bennett. The press is here. Important clients of Charles's are in attendance, and well, appearances matter." Jack blinked. "I wore the suit, the shoes. What's the problem?" Victoria's eyes dipped to the wooden box in his hands before returning to his face. "It's not just the clothes, Jack, it's the overall impression." "The impression," Jack repeated, the word heavy on his tongue. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Look, it's just that Mom's worried." Victoria stepped in again. "We think it might be better if you didn't come into the main reception. You could still watch the ceremony from perhaps the lobby or even outside. It's just better for everyone." For a moment, Jack just stood there, the murmur of the lobby fading into a dull roar in his ears. He looked from Victoria to Daniel, searching for some sign this was a misunderstanding. But Daniel only looked away, as if afraid to meet his eyes. Jack's fingers tightened around the box. "So, I'm not welcome," he said quietly. Daniel winced. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," Jack replied, his voice calm, almost too calm. He looked at his daughter's soon-to-be husband, this man who was about to become part of his family, and wondered if Emily knew this conversation was happening. Victoria's tone softened, but only slightly. "Please understand, we just want everything to be perfect." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, perfect." And without another word, he turned and walked back toward the glass doors. The weight of the wooden box somehow heavier now. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. The rain came in thin, slanting lines, tapping against the hood of the Chevy as Jack slid back behind the wheel. He set the wooden box gently on the passenger seat, its polished lid gleaming under the gray light. From where he sat, he could see the front entrance of the Lakeside Grand through the blur of raindrops. Guests arrived in a steady stream, stepping from black sedans and silver SUVs, umbrellas blooming above them like flowers in a sudden garden. Laughter carried faintly across the lot, muffled by the rain and the closed windows. Jack rested his hands on the steering wheel, his tie still knotted perfectly, the suit jacket still crisp. He'd done everything they asked, everything, and still it hadn't been enough. A valet jogged past, glancing at the old Chevy with the polite disinterest reserved for things that didn't belong in this setting. Jack didn't care. He wasn't here for them. He shifted in his seat, angling himself so he could see through the tall windows into the reception hall. The chandeliers sparkled above a sea of gowns and tuxedos. He caught a glimpse of Emily, white dress, veil trailing, face radiant as she spoke with someone just out of view. For a moment the ache in his chest eased. She looked happy. That was something. Rain pattered harder against the windshield, distorting the scene into shimmering shapes. Jack leaned back, watching quietly, letting the minutes stretch. He imagined Martha in the passenger seat, her hand on his arm, her voice soft. "She's your girl, Jack, that's all that matters." A group of guests hurried past, one man glancing toward the Chevy. Jack looked down at the box on the seat beside him. He'd carved every detail with care, smoothed every edge, polished every curve. It wasn't expensive, but it was his. It was love made solid. He thought about walking it inside, pressing it into Emily's hands, whispering the words he'd written in the note. But the thought of stepping back under those chandeliers, past Victoria's cool eyes, past Daniel's discomfort, was enough to keep him in place. So he stayed, watching from the parking lot, a father at his daughter's wedding, close enough to see her smile, far enough to remain invisible. The rain slid down the glass in crooked rivers, and Jack smiled faintly, almost to himself. It wasn't the seat he'd imagined, but it was still his seat. And for now, that would have to be enough. Jack didn't notice the young woman at first. She'd stepped out from the covered entrance, holding a camera with a long lens that looked too big for her slight frame. She was one of the hired photographers, darting between arriving guests, snapping candid moments for the wedding album. The rain had slowed to a mist, and Jack was wiping a clear circle on the fogged window when she paused halfway across the lot. Her eyes settled on the old Chevy, then on the man sitting inside. Suit and tie in place, hands folded on the wheel, a small wooden box on the seat beside him. She tilted her head, raised the camera, and clicked, once, twice. Jack caught the movement and gave her a small nod, more out of habit than understanding. He'd spent his life being invisible in places like this. It didn't occur to him that someone might see something worth capturing. The photographer lowered the camera, hesitated, then walked toward him. Jack rolled down the window. The cool, damp air slipping in. "Sir, are you part of the wedding?" Jack smiled faintly. "In a way, family." He nodded once. "The bride's father." Her brows lifted. She glanced back toward the glittering lobby. "Why aren't you?" Jack cut her off gently. "Just wasn't my place today." The woman's eyes softened. She looked at him for a long moment, then down at the wooden box. "That for her?" "Yeah." His hand rested on it lightly. "Made it myself." Something in his tone made her lift the camera again. "Do you mind?" Jack shrugged. "Go ahead." She took another photo, this time through the open window. Rain-speckled suit, weathered hands, the careful curve of the carved box. When she lowered the camera again, there was a quiet respect in her face. "Thank you," she said, stepping back. Jack nodded, rolling the window up. He didn't think much about it. Just another moment in a long day he'd be happy to forget. But later that night, when the reception lights had dimmed and the champagne glasses were empty, that photograph would find its way onto a phone screen, then a social feed, and by morning it would be everywhere. By the time Jack pulled into his driveway that night, the rain had stopped. The suit jacket was draped over the passenger seat, the wooden box still unopened beside it. He let himself into the house, the quiet pressing in the way it always did, and set the box gently on the kitchen table. He made coffee out of habit, though he didn't really want it, and sat staring at the steam curling into the air. It wasn't anger that sat heavy in his chest, it was something harder to name. A mix of pride, hurt, and a hollow ache that came from being close enough to witness a moment, but not close enough to be part of it. Somewhere across town, in a warm hotel ballroom, Emily was probably laughing, dancing, making toasts. Jack told himself that was enough. She was happy. That was all a father could want. He didn't know that at that exact moment his phone, an old model that still had a faint crack across one corner, was lighting up on the counter. First message came from an old neighbor, "Is this you?" Then another from one of his fishing buddies, "Jack, you're all over Facebook." When he finally picked it up, the screen was filled with a photo. It was him sitting in the Chevy, suit pressed, hair damp from the rain, the wooden box beside him like a secret he hadn't told anyone. The shot was framed just right, the blurred glow of the lakeside Grand in the background, the raindrops on the windshield turning the lights into something soft. Almost wholly above the photo, the caption read, "The bride's father, not allowed inside, still came to watch from the parking lot." Jack stared at it for a long time, not sure what to feel. He scrolled down and saw the comments, hundreds of them, then thousands. "This breaks my heart. What's wrong with people? That's a real father. Respect. If my dad showed up in a potato sack, he'd still have a seat at my table." I hope the bride sees this and realizes what she's lost. Some people shared their own stories about parents who'd sacrificed without thanks. Others called for the bride and groom to explain themselves. By midnight, the post had been shared over 50,000 times. By morning, it would be in news feeds across the country. And Jack, who had spent most of his life building things with his hands, had suddenly become the subject of a story he'd never intended to tell. By sunrise, the photograph had traveled farther than Jack could imagine. It was on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, posted by strangers in cities he'd never been to under headlines he hadn't agreed to. The father left outside, love in the rain. Why was he watching from the parking lot? Jack's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. His sister in Florida called first, voice trembling with a mix of pride and outrage. Then a man he hadn't spoken to since high school sent a text that read simply, "Jack, they're talking about you on the morning news." He didn't turn on the television. Instead, he brewed another pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wooden box. The note inside, those few simple lines, felt heavier now. He'd written it for Emily's eyes alone, not for a world hungry for a symbol. Across town, in the high-ceilinged suite of the lakeside Grand. Emily's phone was buzzing just as hard. She had woken to find her bridesmaids gathered around, their faces pale, their voices hushed. "Em, you need to see this." The moment she recognized the Chevy in the photograph, her stomach dropped. She knew exactly what seat her father had been in, what rain had been on his shoulders. Her maid of honor's voice was quiet. "It's everywhere. People are upset." By mid-morning, the Whitmores had seen it too. Charles sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through a tablet, his jaw tightening with each headline. Victoria stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, her voice clipped. "We're not making a statement, not yet. but it was too late for control. Reporters had already called the hotel. Comment sections swelled with outrage. Someone had even found the Whitmore's business page and begun leaving one-star reviews that had nothing to do with construction projects. By noon, the pressure was no longer abstract. Clients were calling, asking questions. Invitations to upcoming charity galas were suddenly pending. And still, the photo spread, shared not just as a piece of gossip, but as a kind of quiet rebellion against the idea that money could dictate worth. Somewhere in the noise of it all, a young reporter left a voicemail on Jack's phone. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Mr. Bennett, I'd like to hear your side of the story. People want to know what really happened." Jack deleted the message without listening to the rest. He didn't want the world's stage. He'd only wanted a seat at his daughter's wedding. It was late afternoon when Jack heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway. He was in the shop, planing the edge of a maple board, letting the steady scrape of steel against wood quiet his thoughts. Through the open door, he saw a white sedan pull in. Emily stepped out, still in the soft waves and makeup from the wedding, but her dress replaced by jeans and a sweater. She stood for a moment beside the car, as if rehearsing something, then started toward the shop. "Dad." Jack straightened slowly, setting the plane down. Emily, up close, he could see the puffiness around her eyes. "Can we talk?" He nodded toward the workbench. "Always." She looked around the shop as though it were smaller than she remembered. The smell of sawdust, the old jars of screws, the half-finished shelves, it was all part of her childhood, but today she seemed to see it with different eyes. "I saw the photo," she said finally. I didn't know you were outside." Jack didn't speak. He could feel her searching his face, waiting for him to soften it for her. "They told me you decided not to come in," she went on, her voice quickening, "that you weren't feeling up to it." He let out a slow breath. "That's not what happened." Her shoulders slumped. "I know, I found out this morning. Her voice cracked. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Jack reached for a cloth and began wiping the shavings from the board. More to keep his hands busy than to clean it. "Why?" She blinked. "Why? What? Why are you sorry, Emily? Because of what they did, or because the whole world knows about it now?" The question seemed to knock the air out of her. She lowered herself onto the stool by the wall, the one she'd sat on as a little girl when she'd come in to help by handing him nails. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "because I let them make me believe you didn't fit. Because I didn't fight for you to be there." Jack leaned against the workbench, watching her. "I don't need the world to see me in a tuxedo, Em. I just needed my daughter to want me in the room." Her eyes filled again. "I did want you there. I just let myself get pulled into their world." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Their world isn't yours, not unless you choose it to be, and it sure as hell isn't mine." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Can I still see the gift?" Jack nodded toward the house. "It's on the kitchen table, been waiting for you." They walked together through the fading light, each step a small stitch in a torn seam neither of them had wanted, but both of them now needed to mend. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, though the pot on the counter had long gone cold. On the table, the wooden box sat where Jack had left it, the soft grain of the walnut catching the last amber light of the day. Emily reached for it slowly, tracing the smooth edges with her fingertips. "You made this," Jack nodded. "Every cut, every joint. Took a while to get the lid just right. Your mother would have told me it was crooked if I didn't." Emily smiled faintly. Though her eyes glistened, she lifted the lid, the hinges moving in a slow, graceful arc, revealing the felt lining inside. There, folded neatly, was the note. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Jack watched her eyes move across the words he'd written in his careful, blocky script. "Em, your mom would be proud of you today. I'm proud of you every day. You are the best thing I ever helped build. Wherever life takes you, know you've always got a place with me. Love, Dad." Emily pressed the paper to her chest for a moment before looking up at him. "Dad, I don't deserve this." Jack shook his head. "It's not about deserving, it's about love. You don't earn it, you just have it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Then Emily closed the lid gently, as if sealing something precious inside, and slid the box toward her. "I want this in our home," she said, "where I can see it every day. And I want you there too, for dinners, holidays, everything." Jack studied her face, the way her voice carried a kind of resolve he hadn't heard in years. "You sure about that? Might track sawdust into your fancy house." Emily laughed through the tears. "I'll take it." The air between them felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of the day had shifted into something they could both carry. It was nearly dark when the knock came. not the quick, casual tap of a neighbor, but a deliberate, heavy sound that echoed through the quiet house. Jack and Emily exchanged a glance. She was still holding the wooden box, her fingers resting protectively on the lid. "I'll get it," Jack said. He opened the door to find Daniel standing there. The porch light caught on the reins, still clinging to his tuxedo jacket, his bow tie pulled loose. Like a man who'd stepped out of one world and wasn't sure he belonged in the next. "Jack," Daniel said, his voice low, "can I come in?" Jack hesitated for a long beat before stepping aside. "If you've got something worth saying." Daniel stepped into the living room, glancing briefly at Emily, then back at Jack. "I owe you an apology, a real one." Emily's voice was tight. "You owe him a lot more than that." Daniel ran a hand through his damp hair. "I was wrong. I should have told my parents to back off. I should have stood up for you. I didn't, and I'm sorry." Jack crossed his arms. "And why are you here saying this now? Because a million strangers online think you're the villain." Daniel flinched but didn't look away, partly but mostly because Emily's right. "I let their world become mine, and I forgot what actually matters." Jack studied him in the silence that followed. Daniel looked older than he had that morning, less polished. "More human. I don't need the internet to decide if I forgive you," Jack said finally. "But if you're going to be in Emily's life, you better know what that means. It means family comes first, every time, no matter who's watching." Daniel nodded, the words settling heavy in the room. "Understood." Emily's eyes softened, though her grip on the wooden box didn't loosen. "If you mean that, then start showing it. Not just to my dad, but to anyone who doesn't fit neatly into their idea of perfect." Daniel glanced between them, his voice quiet. "I will." Jack gave a slow nod, then stepped back toward the kitchen. "All right, you've said your piece, now the hard part's living it." Daniel exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath since the moment he knocked. "I'll try." "Don't try," Jack said over his shoulder. "Do." 2 days later, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one online. The photo of Jack in the rain was still everywhere, on news segments, in opinion columns, even in morning talk show banter. The Whitmores had tried to stay quiet, but silence was making them look worse. That afternoon, a press release appeared on the Whitmore construction website and social media accounts. The heading was polished, a message from the Whitmore family. It began stiff, all corporate politeness. "We regret that a misunderstanding at our son's wedding has been misinterpreted by the public." Jack stopped reading there. He didn't need to hear the rest. He knew a non-apology when he saw one. Emily, however, kept going, her jaw tightening. "They're saying they offered accommodations to ensure all guests were comfortable, and that social media narratives have distorted the truth." Jack snorted. "Distorted the truth. That's one way to spin telling a man he's not welcome in the room." By evening, the statement had been torn apart online. Commentators called it tone-deaf, a PR disaster. Memes were already circulating, screenshots of the Whitmore's words over the original photo, with captions like "misinterpreted love" and "comfortable in the parking lot." The backlash only grew when a local reporter dug up a leaked video from the hotel's security cameras, grainy but clear enough to show Victoria and Daniel blocking Jack in the lobby. The audio was muffled, but the body language told the story without words. By the next morning, the Whitmores were in full damage control. Invitations to radio interviews, hastily arranged charity donations, a promise to clarify the record. But nothing seemed to work. And then came the unexpected turn, a trending hashtag, #SeatForDad, with people sharing photos of their own fathers at graduations, weddings, hospital waiting rooms. Stories of men who'd shown up quietly without fanfare just to be there. Jack's phone lit up again and again, strangers thanking him for reminding them what love looked like. He didn't know what to say to any of them. He hadn't set out to start anything. Emily closed her laptop with a sigh. "They're going to have to face you, Dad, publicly or privately, but they can't hide from this forever." Jack leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Then they can knock on my door, same as anybody else." It was late Saturday morning when a sleek black town car pulled into Jack's driveway. The engine cut off, and for a moment no one moved inside. Then the rear door opened, and Charles Whitmore stepped out in a tailored navy coat, his wife Victoria close behind. Emily was already at Jack's house. She stood beside him on the porch, arms crossed, as the Whitmores made their way up the steps. "Mr. Bennett," Charles began, his voice carrying the smoothness of a man used to controlling the room. "We'd like to talk." Jack nodded toward the chairs on the porch. "Talk here, I like fresh air." Victoria hesitated but sat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Charles remained standing as if staying vertical might keep him in charge of the conversation. "We mishandled the situation at the wedding," Charles said finally. Jack's eyes didn't leave his. "That's one word for it." Victoria's tone was careful, practiced. "We never meant to hurt you. The circumstances were exactly what you wanted," Jack interrupted, his voice even but sharp. "You didn't want me there. You thought I didn't fit. You decided my daughter's wedding was better without me in the room." Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. Charles glanced at Emily, then back to Jack. "The public fallout has been difficult for our family, for our business." Jack leaned back in his chair. "So you're here because you're losing contracts, not because you've suddenly found your conscience." Emily's voice cut through the air. "Dad, let me." "No," Jack said gently, his eyes still on Charles and Victoria. "They came to speak to me. Let's hear it." Charles exhaled, the smooth veneer cracking just a little. "We would like to make amends, publicly if necessary, a statement, a gesture." Jack's jaw tightened. "You don't fix what you did with a press release and a photo op. You fix it by owning the truth, and the truth is you put pride over family." For the first time, Victoria looked away. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. "You want to make it right," Jack said finally. "Then start by apologizing to your son-in-law's father, not to the internet, not to your clients, to me. And do it because it's right, not because your business is blighting." The words hung in the air. And Charles's shoulders dropped. His voice was quieter now. "You're right. We judged you by the wrong measures, and for that I apologize." Jack studied him for a long moment, then looked at Victoria. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett." Jack stood, not offering his hand. "Apology noted. Whether I accept it, that'll take time." Emily exhaled slowly, the tension easing just enough for everyone to stand. As the Whitmores walked back to their car, Jack stayed on the porch, watching them go. They had said the words, but he knew the work of meaning them had only just begun. The days that followed felt quieter. The press moved on to other scandals, and the storm online began to settle, but the #seat for Dad lingered like an ember that refused to go out. People still shared their own stories, still tagged Jack in posts about fathers who'd shown up, even when they weren't wanted. Jack didn't reply to most of them. He wasn't in this for the attention. He spent his mornings back in the shop. Familiar rhythm of sanding and sawing smoothing the edges of what had happened. One evening, Emily came by alone. She carried the wooden box under her arm and set it on the table between them. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "Daniel and I are hosting Sunday dinner, not at their house, at ours, and there's a seat for you right at the head of the table." Jack smiled, slow and genuine. "That's where your mother used to sit." "I know," Emily said softly. "It's where you belong." That Sunday, Jack walked into their home and found the table set simply. No crystal chandeliers, no marble floors, just the smell of roasted chicken and warm bread. Daniel greeted him at the door, no tuxedo this time, just a shirt rolled at the sleeves. He shook Jack's hand without hesitation. When they sat to eat, Jack looked around the table, at Emily's smile, at the easy conversation, at the absence of any need to prove he belonged, and he thought, "This is the wedding I needed, right here in this room." Later that night, back in his quiet house, Jack sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Rain tapped gently on the windows, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a barrier between him and the people he loved. He picked up his phone and opened the last message from a stranger online. It was just 4 words, "Thanks for showing up." Jack smiled. "Always," he whispered. "Because that's what fathers do. They show up, even in the rain, even from the parking lot, even when no one is clapping. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the people who matter will see it before it's too late." Thank you for watching this story on Twisted Roots. Family is never perfect. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes it hurts. But when love is real, it shows up in the quietest, strongest ways. I wish you health, peace, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing your family, by blood or by choice, will always have a seat for you at their table. Take care of yourselves and of each other. We'll see you in the next story.